G'day. How you doing? Hey, isn't that worship band pretty good? Great job, fellas. All right. I'm delighted to bring you the love and very best wishes of your brothers and sisters from way down on the other side of the world in Australia. We love our international communion of grace. We love being part of it, and they all want me to send their love and their best wishes to all of you. Do you want to see the few Aussies who are here in the room? Come on, guys. Daphne, stand up wherever you are. Look, we're a very, very inclusive country. If you want to be an honorary Australian, you want to stand up too, that's fine. You're welcome. We'll have you. Thank you. All right. This may work sometime. I don't know. Let's see. No? Tim, can you come to our rescue? The joys of technology. Don't you love it? Can you imagine Jesus delivering the Sermon on the Mount with everyone on their mobile phones? He said, what? Anyway. It doesn't cooperate. Hey, that worked. Australia's a pretty big country. You probably already know that. It's about the same size as the continental US. One of the differences, we only have 1/10 of the population of the US. Aha. Which means that it... Oh, yeah. Come on. We are down under, which means that it looks pretty much like this. Excuse some of the language, but KK was worried that some African language may come out of his mouth. Well, I'm pretty worried some Australian language may come out of mine. And Greg may not approve, but most of the population, that small population, lives on the seaboard, and our churches are pretty much scattered around the seaboard. This is Phil Hopwood's church in Hobart. No, it's not really, but we're pretty much the only country in the world settled as a prison. Now, our Indigenous culture is possibly the longest unbroken Indigenous culture in history, but the British broke it by sending their undesirables, unwanted pocket thieves, sheep stealers and Irishmen to Australia. Because that was the furthest place on the globe they could possibly send them, and there was no hope of them getting back. And I tell you this because church was part of the punishment delivered to the criminals and the unfortunates who were sent down under. In fact, here, this is a replica of a church where the prisoners were walked in to church on Sunday morning with bags on their heads. They were not allowed to see any other human face, but the face of the preacher down the front who harangued them with fire and brimstone and the punishments of hell and the torments of sin. So unsurprisingly, church was considered punishment, and it still is. And I tell you this because, unlike the United States, which was founded by people who were yearning for religious freedom, Australia was pretty much settled by people who were yearning for freedom from religion. And they still are. It is not the Philippines where 100% of the people are religious. It is not Africa where there's a huge movement out of local religion into Christianity. It's not other parts of Asia where some of this is happening. It's a culture which is from the roots fairly anti-religious. And from that lofty point, we have headed steadily downwards. Whoops. Sorry. Not just an opinion, the research in Australia says that we have moved from being post-Christian to anti-Christian. And I'm sure there are parts of the world where you would identify with that. It's not just post-Christian, it's anti-Christian. And our social researchers talk about a culture of hyper-individualism. Australia was pretty proud of its individualistic culture, but now it's a culture of hyper-individualism, which he says is individualism on steroids, a ruthless individualism which doesn't care about anyone else. And one of the wealthiest, most beautiful, most blessed nations on earth, as a result of this hyper-individualistic culture, now has the highest rate of teen suicide in the world. So everyone has a story, and we're talking about stories during the conference, and stories are important. All stories are important. Your story is important. My story is important. Our denominational story is important. But it's important because it's not just a solo story. Stories are important as they are stories that are shared together, and shared together stories really only find purpose and meaning because they enter God's story, the big story of the gospel. And while we're excited by big stories and exciting stories here on earth, we never want to forget the everyday stories, because God is in the everyday stories just as much as the exciting and dramatic and big stories. And if you've got 10 people in Boise, Idaho, God is interested in your story, and it's just as exciting to him as all the other big stories that we are joyfully sharing this conference. In fact, Bonhoeffer, one of my favorite authors, says this: what may seem weak and trifling to us may be great and glorious to God, because he's in it. And it's his story, not just ours. These are some of our employed Australian pastors, and I want to put them up there because I want to honour them and respect the work that they do in a difficult environment. There's no economic or social benefit of being a pastor in Australia. In fact, it's pretty insulting. You come into the US and they say, "What do you do?" And you say, "I'm a pastor." And they say, "That's nice." You go into Australia and you say, "What do you do?" And you say, "I'm a pastor." They say, "I don't think we'll let you in." What are you doing here? So I want to honour and respect our pastors. Joe used to use the phrase, all kinds of churches in all kinds of places, and we have all kinds of churches in all kinds of places, and all of them have their stories, and obviously we can't talk about all of their stories. If there's a consistent story, we must be the care bag church of Australia, because all of our congregations tend to do care bags, and I'm sure many of you do too. So care bags for battered wives, for the homeless, for people exiting out of prison, children who've run away, that kind of thing. And it's not just the material in the care bag that helps, it's the fact that somebody actually thought about them, which may be the first time that's ever happened in their life. And so they get hope, which KK eloquently talked about this morning. There is a hope that, hey, there might be something better. All of our churches do that. Let me tell you the story of one little church that did. Church in Melbourne, our pastor quit, and so this little fragile church was left wondering, where do we go from here? So we first of all worked with the church. We developed a pastoral team. Out of that pastoral team emerged the obvious pastor for the congregation. And they began to think, well, how do we connect with our community? How do we serve our community? How do we do mission? Having been a very isolated, exclusive group, how do we cross this bridge into connecting with our community? So they prayed about it. And I have to tell you, they didn't come up with a huge, gigantic strategic plan, although all our churches do strategic plans each year. They go through a planning and reflection process, but they prayed about it. And the first opportunity that presented itself was tree planting. And they said, well, that's not too exciting. That doesn't sound too spiritual. But we said we'd help, so we'll go and do it. And they did. And after that, they got invited into a festival to do face painting. And they said, well, that's not too exciting. But we said we'll help, so we will. So they went and did face painting. And the Shire, the county, something similar, the county that was putting on this community festival said, you know what, this festival's got too commercial. We want to change it. We want to ask you as a church to reorganise a new community festival. And I said, well, we're just a little church. And they said, we know that. That's why we want you to do it. So they did. And the first year, they had 100 people there, which was nice. This year, they had 10,000. Just because they wanted to be incarnational and serve. Not only that, last month the pastor retired, and Matthew Goodsey, who's here, was installed as the new pastor in that congregation. And we had representatives from local government, state government, and an apology from someone in the national government, who's actually the Speaker of our House of Representatives, who couldn't make it. All of the other government levels were represented in our church service when we installed Matthew as pastor. Now that's different. There by the grace of God. Plus we had pastors from numerous other fellowships, lots of community groups and so on referenced. So sometimes, even though we're small, it may appear difficult when we surrender to God and allow God to make of us what he will. It's amazing what he does. He can even help me figure out which button to press on one of these. There's a lot of books on mission. We've been asked to talk a little bit about our approach to mission. So here's my theology of mission. It just saves you reading 25 textbooks. That well-known theologian, the Wizard of Id. John, what do you want to be when you grow up? I would love to do missionary work in a rundown, hopeless town full of heathens. We all miss you. Who said I was leaving? Because we often think of mission over there, but mission is right here. Mission is the person in front of us. Mission is our family. Mission is the people God brings us into contact with. And of course, Gary has spoken eloquently to that. So these are some of the words around mission that I think our Melbourne church embodies. First of all, mission's to be relational and incarnation oriented. It's relational. There's no fancy stuff in that. It's relational. Sustainable, because we could bury ourselves, we could bury our church, we could bury every aid agency in need overnight. We have to think sustainability, because we're finite. God isn't, but we are. And a big idea is this, starting with life, starting with what is good, starting with strengths rather than just starting with problems and needs. And I like this notion the church is not a problem to be solved, but a family to be loved and, sure, developed, because that's part of love. Some more words in this prayerful, joyful, thankful approach. Obviously, our mission is simply participation in the ministry of the Father from the Son through the Spirit. It's incarnational presence. Can I quote an old 70s song? Love the one you're with, but in this context. All right? It's organic. We start with life, and I love Gary Deddo's line, it's about health and faithfulness, not about numbers and marketing. It's about love, not marketing. We don't peddle the church, so it's intentional, but we don't have to be all intense about it because we're resting in Christ. It's participation in what Christ is doing. And here's one of the things Christ is doing. Would you like to listen to a few of our younger people talk about it? This is SEP. I sat down and chatted with some of the campus.
Well, this time particularly I've learnt a lot about God's love for humanity and his sacrifice by sending Jesus, and just the depth of his love. It's just wonderful.
And life-changing.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
I think it's just the fellowship of everyone together, worshipping together, eating together, loving each other. It's really something that is so great to take away from SCP.
Well, I came back as staff for a few reasons. I think probably the key thing was I live by a verse in the Bible, by 1 Peter 4:10, and each one should use whatever gift he has received to serve others faithfully, administering God's grace in its various forms. I wanted to give back to those who gave me so much, gave me all those happy memories, those good times, and I wanted to be able to give that to some people, make that special for some people.
Now, I know you all have youth camps, but it's part of our joy as a family as we celebrate who we are as GCI. And we, I think, are all encouraged by the hope of not just next generation, but next generation, next generation. Do you know you have brothers and sisters in the remote highlands of Papua New Guinea and the Solomons? Australia has a long-term pastoral care relationship with congregations in both nations. This is Solomons. Looks idyllic, but you know, Solomons has the highest rate of domestic violence in the world. And most villages tend to be denominational. And sometimes one village won't talk to the next. But the good news is our village has actually worked to create partnerships and connections and relationships with other villages, which is lovely. This is your brothers and sisters in the remote highlands in Mount Willem in Papua New Guinea. They send you their love and their greetings. They get together for church and listen to Speaking of Life from Joe. It's not just Rick Warren. In the remote highlands of PNG. PNG is called the land of the unexpected. You can expect danger. It's a very dangerous place to travel in. For example, that's a national highway. Our little church up there is not inward looking. They serve the local high school. And unfortunately in PNG, education's a real challenge. They also work with an orphanage there as well. And our involvement with the church there is building up the infrastructure of the village, not just pastoral care. But this is part of the pastoral care, the development of the local leaders. And I bring you greetings from Ben and Richard. And I think they would be delighted to think that there was a connection with you at this moment. And the beautiful part about this story is these guys come from different tribes. And PNG is a tribal culture. It's a payback culture where one tribe constantly is in warfare with another, and that payback cycle never ends. And they've crossed that bridge of reconciliation, both personally and in community, and people watch their example and now come to our church and our village to talk reconciliation. We have international connections, but Rod and John will talk about that, and Eugene. So finally, love from my family to yours. God bless, grace and peace. Keep praying for us as we pray for you. Thank you.